Welcome back to the ARKAST Podcast, brought to you from the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative. And we have an event coming up on September 1st to the 7th of the ARKAST Podcast Festival here in Central Arkansas. Then we're going up to Northwest Arkansas on the 20th and 21st. And so in preparation of that, we're doing a series of special episodes. And today our special guest is S.A. Grant. Do you go by S.A. or do you go by Chanel?
Essay, I would say, is my alter ego that I go by when we're talking about either books or podcasts. Essay all day.
Okay, so now I know how to address you. So Essay.
Yeah.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit, like yourself? You said you're an author and podcaster, and so can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would just say I started with I'm a lifelong learner. I mean, kind of having opportunities to kind of learn different systems, different business structures, and throughout life, I just kind of collaborated all these different things into what today is called a podcast. But essentially, I think it's an opportunity for me to help educate other entrepreneurs on their journeys and point them in the right direction.
Great. So what are some of the tools that you use to do that?
That's one of those loaded questions. It's like a peeling back an onion, right? So
yeah, right.
I mean, I always say I'm an avid component of interviewing founders. So just through like the founder philosophy, I'm a real big component of lifetime deals. So AppSumo. So I literally have a budget item on my on my active budget every month to buy software to do things that I'm doing on a podcast. So literally, I probably have access to about 1,000 different programs, right? So
wow, yeah.
So I guess just slice it down. Like you talk about more so like the marketing, the podcasting, the systems. Like what slice of the pie you want to talk about? Sure.
So I know that you have a 3-step system that's on your banner on LinkedIn and on your website. And one of those steps is creating a podcast. And so this is strictly for businesses. And so why podcasting, I would ask?
It kind of goes back to finding that, I was a natural podcaster without knowing it. I mean, I kind of had a stroke back in 2018, and my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife right now, we sat down. She was talking like, okay, for the past 18 years, you've been branding all these different corporations and these different companies through like my digital agency. And she was like, now it's time for you to kind of go through a recovery stage and then come back as a brand. You should brand yourself. So I took that to heart. I married her, and then essentially it took me about 18 months to make a full recovery. And then February 20th is when I launched the podcast. So it was kind of like a intuition kind of thing from my wife's standpoint. But for me, it was kind of like, was I going to be a YouTuber or was I going to be a podcaster? And again, I was the guy behind the curtain. So I picked the latter. In 2020, looking in hindsight, podcasting, it doesn't really matter what format, as long as you're putting out that content. And I would say on all platforms.
Yeah, for sure. So why do you recommend podcasting for businesses?
I look at it as it's a tool. It's not just marketing. I mean, prime example, like we're in season 6. We've recorded, obviously 20 something to 60 episodes per season on average, right? So with that, right, one episode, we're still creating content from season 1, episode 1. And that was shot back in February of 2020. So I want to owner to think about that. The trouble is always trying to create content, right? So why would you try to create content when the content can come naturally? You could talk about what you do, talk to someone that does what you do, talk about partnerships, talk about strategy, and then take that piece of content, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour, chop it up, dice it up, make banners, make video clips. You can make so many different elements from 1 hour's piece of content.
Absolutely. And it's pretty brilliant that you're able to take, content that you created, 3 years ago and still be able to use that. You take the nuggets of information from there. And I guess, are you using them in social media as well? Are you sharing them as reels or shorts or?
100%. So 100% based upon systems. And I always say, like, until you really understand RSS feeds, is it's kind of like you're doing yourself a disservice. I mean, RSS feeds is your friend. So every single time we post a piece of content through the RSS feed, then we have systems that capture that information and reiterates that information and pushes it back out to the masses on social media. So again, every 6 to 9 months, it's still posting and recycling those original posts, and it's adding new posts. So the more we create, the more that system just keeps evolving and multiplying to the point to where on average today, we probably post about anywhere between 30 to 60 pieces of content every day.
Ooh, wow. That's pretty amazing. And that's something I'm not even aware of. I use RSS feeds and there's several different things as far as like blog posts, or of course everybody has podcasts, RSS feed that you're able to update some social media. Every time you drop an episode, it'll automatically update for that. But you're saying that you could take any piece of content and upload that to our, wow, I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yeah. I mean, think about it from a
Yeah,
standpoint of there's YouTube has a RSS feed, Shopify has a RSS feed, WordPress
right.
has a RSS feed. So again,
Mhm.
all of them work just like a podcast RSS feed. So why don't you
Right.
leverage these different environments to make that content at scale?
That's very, very interesting. Um, so what kind of a success can people, imagine that they'll have whenever they start a podcast?
I would say if they're dedicated to it, because that's the problem with podcasting today. I mean, we got like 3 to 4 billion podcasts, and only
Mhm.
like 2% of them are actually active podcasts. Because somebody said, "I want to
Right.
make a podcast. I'm gonna make $1 million doing it." They
Yeah.
start 3 episodes and they fade to black. So essentially, it's consistency and it's creating systems, right? It's figuring out how to monetize it, how to systematize it, if you're going to have guests, how do you onboard your guests? All of these different elements go into play. Once that's established, then a podcast could be definitely something that's very fruitful for any business, whether you're a plumber or a roofer or you're a doctor or a lawyer.
Sure. And I guess the expectations of like what success is and like having to define that for yourself before you even get started on the podcast. Because like if you're looking for, I hear it all the time, people are want to start a podcast, like you said, they want to make their $1 million, right? And they imagine they're going to do that by creating a really nice video or a podcast episode and then uploading it to YouTube or one of the channels and get monetization off of it, and they're going to get rich and be an influencer off of that. But it doesn't seem to be the case.
No, it takes more work than I mean, obviously,
Right.
if you're thinking about Joe Rogan, for example, Joe Rogan had a huge following. He was a stand-up comedian. He was in the UFC. He did all these different things in media limelight. So when he became a podcaster, it was just like turning on a switch when you walk into your kitchen. It's almost instant, like
Mhm.
follow. Versus a business owner, your immediate epicenter of a circle of your clients, maybe family members of the business partners may or may not even tune in because they don't know you as a podcaster. So you're going to have
Right.
to build up that reputation in that space over a period of time, much like most podcasters that were originally business owners that are doing today, including myself. My year one was kind of like asking people to be on a podcast and they look at me kind of like, you're a podcaster now? Like, how does that work? But now, you look 20 in hindsight, it goes without saying that I know what I'm doing and I've been doing it long enough, but it took 3 years for me to get to where I am.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And that's a lot of dedication. Like 3 years of creating content consistently. And how often would you say that people need to record?
Like my first season, I started off just to test out, right? To kind of figure things out because I wanted to iron out the wrinkles. So I was doing 2 episodes per month. So that's every other week.
Mhm.
By the time I got to about halfway through the season, roughly about 12 episodes, I was like, okay, like I was more scared of not having enough people to interview. And that's kind of the drawback to podcasters when they first start, that fear of I need people. Once I got into like the second half of the season, then we went to 4 episodes per week. And then now that we're in season 6, we had like prime example, we leverage podcast recruiters. And I just spoke to one maybe last month and had like a 1 hour conversation. Things went well. And then he booked me 28 highly successful individuals after that call. So again, like once you figure out the systems, you really don't have to be concerned with the fear of trying to find people. They will essentially be dropped and delivered in your lap if you stay consistent and build like you're building a business. That's what podcast really is.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess diverting from that a little bit, because I know that you use podcasting in your business, but what is Boss Uncaged?
So I would say Boss Uncaged essentially is a legacy brand, right? I mean, that's why I named it Boss Uncaged and I rebranded it
Mhm.
from my original agency. So on one hand, obviously, as a consultant, as an individual, I'm a personal brand, I'll do a lot of brand and growth strategy consultation because again, I'm living the brand of Boss Uncaged. So a lot of people they want to say, well, how does it work? Like, how do you become a brand, and how does your company become a brand, and how do you leverage that from a podcast? Then
Mhm.
on the back end, right, I'm doing these interviews. So as I'm doing these interviews, like the people I'm interviewing potentially are my leads. So again, every time I interview someone, they may or may not need the services that my digital agency has. So I'm more so focused in the podcasting space. So if someone needs branding, brand development, brand strategy, we can do that for them. If they need content creation, course creation, well, we do that for ourselves so we can do it for them. They need digital marketing and they need growth strategy. we do it for ourselves and we can do it for them as well too. But again, I'm built up to where I've orchestrated this noise to where it funnels in through the podcast and everything else happens afterwards.
That's pretty amazing. I love the brand too. And you stay you stay on brand too. You've got even the way you talk to people. I know several times I've noticed that you've talked to me, you address me as boss, which goes along with your branding, you know what I mean? And it's great because you're giving a person a taste of the branding itself, but also you're giving them an affirmation at the same time. So they're feeling good about themselves and they feel good about you and your brand because the way that you're building them up and what you're offering. So it's pretty brilliant what you've built. So where do you see? Yeah, for sure. Where do you see the podcasting going? And I know viewer listenership has grown exponentially over the past few years. And how long do you think this is a media that's going to thrive, or is it going to grow? Is it going to decrease? How do you see that going?
I think it's funny that we're having this conversation today because just this morning I had syndicated a post about podcasters essentially becoming like the new NFL, the new NBA, or the new, baseball teams. Because if you think about it, like if you go back to like the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s, even to today, a lot of people like they want to go to school, but they want to go to school with actually having a grant or a scholarship to play a sport. What would it look like if you got a scholarship to go to school to be a podcaster, right? I mean, like this is something that we're really talking about because in a sense of TV and movie, they've been doing it forever. Podcasting falls into that spectrum, right? I mean, podcasting is a new individually owned digital platform of radio. So think about that. Back in the day, you would go to school for communication and you would get a grant or a scholarship for that particular degree. Why would you not kind of look at it from podcasting standpoint? So I see it growing into more of a household thing to where kids can kind of look at it and say, you know what, I want to be a podcaster. Like I can't wait till the day that somebody comes on and says, my kid asked me to be a podcaster. What do I do? I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, and it's surprising to me sometimes. I guess because I'm not a kid anymore, right? So that we went to a true crime fest. What was it, last month or so? And one of the true crime podcasters that was there had a group of just kids that were there. They were all friends and they were together, but they were like fangirling out over having this. I was like, this is new to me. It's like I never thought that podcasting would get to this point to where you are becoming sort of a semi-celebrity in certain circles to people. You're an influencer, you're inspirational to some people. And so have you had any of those moments yet where maybe your kids or some kids that you've been around have like looked up to you like, oh, you're a podcaster? They think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think our kids, they grew up in this environment as far as being around entrepreneurs and then starting the podcast. So kind of unfortunately, because I'm the parent, they kind of take advantage of it until like they're 20 something. They'll circle back, but their friends have come over and we've had conversations before about podcasting. They'll ask questions. I think they're more so fascinating with like, if you look behind me, if you're watching this on video, I have sneakers behind me. So like kids and sneakers. And again, the Boss Uncaged brand, we have essentially about 30 something different types of sneakers that we've created that's 100% branded for Boss Uncaged. So when they see me wearing the sneakers, they're just like, oh, those are cool. What are those? And I was like, well, they're Boss Uncaged. Like they're my brand. Like it's not Nike, it's not Reebok, it's 100% Boss Uncaged. And they kind of give that look of like, first, how did you do it? And kind of like, and then the other question from like older generation is like, well, why did you do it?
Yeah, for sure. That's pretty amazing. The bringing up the shoes, I would love to be able to do. That's great. Everything you have there is on brand. I'm looking at the color scheme behind you. From I guess you're preparing for. This is your backdrop, right? So whenever people do ask you to be on shows or you're recording your own content, you've got your own display case back there that shows off your brand. And so your colors, your logos everywhere. So I mean, it's brilliant. You're obviously good at what you do.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. So not to give too much of your content away or the information that you have, but one of our events coming up is on September 1st. We're having a podcast pitch event. Where it's sort of a Shark Tank style competition where people are going to come in and pitch what they think is a good idea for a podcast, who's going to host it, what their goals are, and that type of thing. What would be some of the advice that you would give to people that are going to be up on that stage?
I would say do your research. I mean, do your due diligence. It's not just coming up there saying I'm going to talk about murder mysteries. I mean, that's already on the market. Like, kind of dive into it a little bit more, put a little bit of edge on it, a little bit of spin. Do some Google searches, figure out if there's even like, is it an up and coming thing? I think a good thing for pre-podcasters to do is go to Google Trends and kind of see what's trending, what has been trending for the past year, 5 years. And you want something that's going to be evergreen, something that's not going to be you talk
Right.
about for like 3 days and then it fades to black, right?
Yeah.
Kind of not to knock Meta, but Meta had its time of shine and then now it's kind of dying down, but obviously it's going to come back. But now if you had a podcast 100% on Meta, like what are you going to do now? Like, so
Right.
again, you want to talk about topics that have longevity.
Sure. And I've seen, quite a few of those podcasts do that, where they'll take either something that's like a hot topic, at the time, and we'll say like the, 2020 elections, or if it's a movie that came out that was, really had a big following around it, but then people sort of forgot about it since then. But there's only so many episodes that you can record on that content, especially if it's not staying in the zeitgeist, if it's not being, just the fire isn't being stoked or publicly, you're sort of rehashing the same content, and it, your passion probably fades out from that, and so your likelihood of continuing with that is going to die out. I would say, so question for you about, anybody that wants to start a podcast, already going into that, what kind of, I guess, preparation of like dedication should they have? I mean, what kind of expectations should they have of, okay, I've got this concept. How dedicated do they have to keep themselves, or should they just be, well, try it for a couple of episodes and see if you like it?
I mean, because there's so many different formats to podcasting, you really have to look at it from the standpoint of, first of all, is it going to be a hobby that potentially could become a business, or are you going into it to say, okay, it's going to be a business and you're going to treat it like that from day one? That's the thing. Because again, I mean, obviously some people may create a hobby and may never get to the business point of view, but they enjoy what they did. They may do 2 or 3 seasons and then it fade to black. But if you're going for the longevity of it, then you really need to sit down and understand the principles that go into it. So to answer your question about like time, I would say start off with small bites, because again, if you start off with this grandiose vision to say, hey, I'm going to rival Joe Rogan, you're going to get burned out pretty quickly. I'm not to say you shouldn't be ambitious, but you also have to be realistic. And again, you have to kind of spend your first year learning the craft. Like my first year of podcasting, I didn't know anything about podcasting. So I spent a lot of time like studying the trade and then realizing the problems with it, and then creating solutions and systems behind the scenes for myself that if you fast forward 2-3 years now, those systems that I came up with back then, now I'm leveraging them and reselling them and repurposing them and monetizing the podcast because of what I created 2 years ago.
Absolutely. And that's great. I mean, now you're sharing that with your clients. So so I mean, I think everybody starts off with a certain level of experience, and it's just like flying a plane. You can even go to school for being a pilot, but until you get in the cockpit and start, being hands on and trying to get up in the air, there's still a huge learning experience to have there. I would say the same with podcasting. Myself, I used to be, I guess, call myself a podcast enthusiast. And so I listened to a lot of people. And like you said, I saw some things and opportunities. I was like, I like this, but they're missing this. And it's like, this is the unique angle that I could take, and just went off and just started, as long as your content is great. And you may have a different opinion. I'd love to hear it about, the quality. So I would say that as long as your content is strong and entertaining or educational and it draws people in, then I think people are more likely to overlook, sound of like a washing machine in the background or something like that. But you do typically want to have the best quality audio as you can. So what are your recommendations for that?
I mean, it's a devil's advocate, right? Because I mean, right off bat, kind of going back to the statement when I said whether it's going to be a business or whether it's going to be a hobby. So people that from that standpoint, they want to go out and spend $10,000 worth of equipment for something that may only last one season, right? So kind of like, it's kind of like you go into the pool. You got to put your foot in the water to kind of see if you want to jump in the water first, right? Or you could just jump in blindly and figure it out. But ideally, when it comes to podcasting, I would say start. The sooner you start, you'll figure out, because prime example, like you're not using a headset, but I am using a headset. And the reason for that, there's a million different types of microphones, right? You probably like a microphone that's a boom, that's hanging off camera, that cannot be seen. But for me, I move and I talk and I jump around, and with those type of microphones, they may be in fluctuations. So for me, I need my microphone to follow me wherever I go, hence why I use a headset. So if you don't talk with your hands and you're kind of like stiff, and then obviously then the microphone in front of you will work, right? So kind of have to figure out your synergy, figure out, you know, are you going to do 2 people in a room together? Are you going to be a round table? Is it going to be 100% remote? All these are variables to figure out what type of equipment you want. I would say get anything, start with that, play it back, listen to it, right? Then there's secondary software that can kind of help you with that. Lighting is something else that's big as well too, because I mean, obviously, if you look at my first season videos, I didn't have any lighting. I was just going off of the computer light, and I was in a dark room and I had no branding behind me. But I think when people are looking at your journey and look back 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they see the evolution of where you are, then they could appreciate it more than you just jumping out the scene brand new with everything done like you're a professional right out the box.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think it's hit the nail on the head right there. It's like it is a journey for the listener, just as it is for you yourself as you're growing. Yeah, and I'm actually using AirPods in my ears because the microphone, the office space that I'm in is sort of an open floor plan, and there's a very particular office that's louder than the rest of them. And you can usually hear on my regular microphone here. So I was hoping that this would block off, and that's why we checked, you know, sound before we even started. It was like, you having to hear that. So yeah, more often than not, you already have some technology to start with. If you have a phone in your pocket, you've got everything you probably need to go ahead and start, even doing, you know, video, and then build up from there with quality audio. How soon do you think that somebody should climb up in the quality of, you know, the content that they're putting out there?
You're talking about the quality of like the video and audio, or like the
Yes.
of okay, yeah. So
Let's
the
start
quality,
there.
yeah. So I mean, with that, I think there's layers to it, right? I would think get to a season, or at least half a season with whatever you have first, and you know, record at least a dozen episodes, and you want to kind of figure out your quality versus who you're interviewing quality, or just your quality and the perception of your quality before you kind of upgrade. But then after that, after about the first 6 months or so, or 3 months, then you can start layering in things, right? What is your primary thing? First and foremost will be your microphone, because that's where the quality comes in. And then you could think about, you know, switchers, and, you know, like prime example, like my setup, I got like 6 screens, and I got an audio switcher, a video switcher, tablets, and all this craziness, but it didn't start off that way.
Right. I can tell your camera has autofocus too. Sometimes you move, and when you start talking with your hands, it'll retry to focus on you. So yeah, upgrading that video equipment later. I think audio comes first because it's an audio format, right? That's what you're saying. The podcasting, first and foremost, is audio, and then the video is secondary, even though it's climbing in popularity. So how do you feel about, you know, like platforms like YouTube that's now added their own podcast tab to that? Or where do you see that going? How do you feel about it?
I'll say it's all about timing, right? So now that YouTube is on the game plan, and I want people to understand, like, YouTube is not just video. YouTube is a search engine. So if you're not playing on YouTube, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. And for me, year one, I didn't do YouTube. I was just trying to figure out the game, right? Then I still recorded all that content. I just didn't post it on YouTube. So at least I had the foresight to realize that content could come in handy later on, no matter how cringy or nasty it looked in comparison to my video today. So that's the first thing, right? But I would say leverage YouTube now, because again, YouTube is another way of monetizing, right? You get 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, pretty much get a few thousand hours of watch time, and your channel's monetized. It kind of is a no-brainer, and then you can grow and scale whenever you have time to really focus on how to manipulate the algorithm.
Right, for sure. So I guess opportunities that are going to come with it, like even Spotify is allowing for video now on some of the premium, you know, those subscriptions. So how much larger do you think the video portion is going to be for podcasting? Will we revert back, or is it going to continue to get, you know?
No, I think it's going to progressively move forward, because ideally, think of it from the standpoint of how many pieces of content you can get from video versus audio. Yes, you could transcribe audio. Yes, you can create images from audio per se. But ideally, if you're starting off with video and then you're downgrading it to audio, then you have the video content and you have the audio content all from one piece of essential work that you spend for 1 hour to get. So starting off with video first would be ideal. No matter how grimy that video is, just make sure your audio is great. And then eventually your video will catch up to the audio. And then to your point you said earlier, you're telling a story. Hey, I'm starting off my new podcast. My video's crap, my audio's great, right? Season 2, now my video's getting a little bit better. My audio's getting better. Season 3, now I have 4K video and I have great quality audio step by step. And then you get to the point to you're in a studio, you're in a set, and all these other things that come with it.
Amazing. Great. So in the past, you said you started in 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in that, how soon did you start seeing some real progress in yourself? I know it's like kind of like going to the gym, right? Where you're working out,
Yeah.
you're working out, you're working out, and you're trying to eat better. And you don't really see improvements because you're looking at yourself in the mirror every day. But other people, they see they only see you every few days or something like, oh, you're really making some improvements. So how soon did you start seeing some improvements in yourself?
I would say when I started recognizing the improvements and I started honing in on the improvements, because prime example, like if you go to the gym, right, and someone's telling you,
Mhm.
like, yo, your back is cut, it's brolic.
Right.
And you don't realize that your back looks like that. You've just been working out, doing it. And then one day you start looking at your back and you're like, well, damn, I should probably start working out my back a little bit more, and your back gets bigger, more defined, and everything else is working out too, but your back becomes your focal point. So for me, it was about hosting. Once I started hearing that, okay, like you're a really good host, you do your research, like you told my story well, I was just kind of like, you're a good listener. And I've heard those things over and over again, season 1, season 2. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to take those and I'm going to master those crafts. So like now when somebody get interviewed on my podcast, there's an onboarding form that kind of gives me all their background information, like their social media profiles, and they expect me to just stop top level. But what I do is I deep dive. I may go into, like, prime example, yesterday I had an interview and it was a lady that had this business and, physical working out, nutrition and all that. But I talked about her dad and I talked about her brother. I talked about her dog. I talked about her mom and pulled all those elements in. And I found those elements from going to her social media profiles. Like I was calling her parents by their first names, right? On the episode live. So for a person that's meeting me for the first time and I'm naming off their brother, their mom, their business, all by first name basis, they know that they can trust me with their story because I've done my work. And that's what I mean by feeding into what you're great at.
That's incredible. All that background as an interview for your guest. As I was going to ask the question about that later, but you absolutely got that. So I think it's an extra effort that a lot of people don't put it into. And I'm usually joined by my co-host Karen Stewart, and she has 20 years of background in journalism and the degrees and all that stuff. And so she usually does the background, and then I'm going in blind. And that way, it's a good dynamic for us, where I'm asking questions, and then she knows a lot of the answers of things that we're not even going to ask about yet. So it makes it for a good time for the host. But doing your background, your research on all of them, it's very good point. Very good point that as a host, you need to know who it is that you're going to be interviewing. So as far as where you want to take, Boss Uncaged and podcasting itself, where do you see that going? What are your bigger overall goals?
I think it's stacking up enterprise level, right? I mean, I look at all businesses as far as multiple different brands. I always use this comparison to where if you look at Steve Jobs, he's a personal brand, right? He's kind of like a household name at this point in time, whether he's dead or alive. Then you look at Apple as the company brand associated to Steve Jobs, right? Then you look at the product brand, the iPhone. Then you look at the service brand, the iTunes. All of them are all falling under the umbrella of Apple, and it's associated to Steve Jobs. So I'm trying to educate people on that platform, and I'm like the living example of that. Like if you know Boss Uncaged, you know S.A. Grant, you know Boss Uncaged, and then our services and our products fall under it. Like prime example, our shoes or our jackets, our hats, or our services, whether it's digital marketing, content, branding, growth strategy, all of these elements every single day I'm living and breathing them. So that way the definition of what I'm educating individuals on, it's comprehensible because you can kind of see it firsthand versus thinking about Steve Jobs, which is kind of out of reach for most people to comprehend what he created, right? So that's just the way I look at it. It's kind of like you have to like live and breathe the example. And to what you said earlier about my background, well, my first background had other elements in it, right? And then eventually I had a backdrop, and then I had like I still have Yoda and I still have like Darth Vader, but it's going to get to the point to where those are the last 2 items that are completely behind me that are not branded as Boss Uncaged. So what do you think is going to happen probably in the next season or 2? they're probably going to get faded out. It's going to be something else that's a Boss
Yeah.
Uncaged lion or something that's going to be in the background. But again, it's the evolution.
That's pretty amazing. And some of your books that you put out there, are they tied to your podcast? And how do you, if so, how do you use that content in both forms, either written and audio?
Yeah. So like my last book, I would say is probably the best example of co-branding a book, an author, and a podcast brand. So obviously it's by S.A. Grant, has podcast, but at the top of it, you can see the brand all day, every day, Boss Uncaged. So this is kind of like pod notes. Again, I'm talking to podcasters, I'm talking to people related to podcasting. And so essentially this is one book of many, then they could look forward to having more books that are quick, short reads to help them on their journey. In addition to that, I also created, and this, I got my stickers all over this one, but this is the Boss Uncaged notebook. So this notebook is essentially designed for anyone to take notes. It's a documenting system, and it allows you to catalog and think about information a little bit differently. And then last but not least, out of my 9 books, this is my third one, which was Boss Uncaged, the book journal. Because again, we have a book podcast that goes hand in hand with our Boss Uncaged book, So every time I ask that question about what books you're reading, and I got to the point, so I started thinking about, well, every episode I'm recording, someone is talking about a book. Maybe I should make a book club. Maybe I should make a book podcast. And then sure as hell, I made a book journal to catalog all the books that you read in one book versus having multiple different books. So all of these are just systems based upon starting with that one podcast.
That's great. And with the books about podcasting itself, I mean, could somebody go through your series of books and then know, well, at least a great deal of base knowledge in order to get started for podcasting? Or is it more for the intermediate? Or
I would say the first book, the last book I created, which is the podcast like launching. Like this book is more so about getting leads and referrals. So then it'll probably be another book about equipment. It'll probably be another book about hosting. And right now I'm writing behind the scenes, probably like several dozen books on topics. So if you see me post any articles, 9 out of 10, those articles are the preliminary startings of a book.
Fantastic. And you're crossing that over into your podcasts themselves. A lot of that information. Okay.
So a lot of that information, I mean, if I'm interviewing someone, we're not going to necessarily talk about my content. We're going to talk about their content. But again, the branding of it is the education behind the scenes. So we have a Boss Uncaged Academy as well, which the books then lead someone to listen to an episode to kind of figure out if you want to listen to our real estate episodes, right? If you want to listen to our software development episodes, because again, we have so many different diverse background of individuals that we interviewed that we've created an online directory to make it easy for people to search and figure out who they're looking for and if they want to listen to that episode. And then after that, if you want more information on like the marketing, the strategy, that's when the academy and the books come into play.
Incredible. Well, I say thank you so much for being here and for recording this episode with us. And we would look forward to showing this to some of the people that are going to the events, especially preparing for the pitch contest. And there's even a workshop on interviewing guests. And so I'm glad that you hit on that. That was great. It was perfect. And then of course we had the ARKAST Festival all week and then going to Northwest. So it's a whole month of events coming up. And so like this will be very valuable to people that are trying to start or in the intermediate phase. Maybe they've been doing it for a while. And so you've dropped a lot of knowledge here, for a lot of people, and hopefully they can get out and reach out to you to help further them along on their podcast journey. And so where can people find you?
I love when that question is asked, and I'm trying to make it as systematically easy as possible, right? So you could literally go to Google and type in Boss Uncaged. And at this point in time, we pretty much dominate the top 10 pages of Google. So any one of those systems, right? Like whether you're looking for us on YouTube, you'll find it there. If you're looking for our actual webpage, you'll find it there. If you're looking for our merchandise, you'll find it there. So you can kind of see how one podcast can have many different tentacles and legs and grow.
Fantastic. And should they go to your website as well?
Yeah, bossuncaged.com. It makes it simple. Yeah. So I mean, everything literally, you just type in. It's at the point now you can go to YouTube, you can go to Amazon, and you type in Boss Uncaged, any one of these environments, and some reference of who we are is going to come up. Right.
Which is a good lesson in itself on branding and getting yourself, great SEO and everything cross-referencing itself. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that you can speak about?
Yeah, I just want the people that are listening to this, obviously you're already kind of in thinking about podcasting, and I don't want you to kind of think of podcasting as being a task. You could look at it as being a passion that can grow into an opportunity that could then make you wealthy, or at least have extra income coming in. So there's multiple different things, right? You can get spiritual aspects from it, but at the same time, you can get monetization from it. So you just want to understand these principles and stay dedicated to the cause.
Beautiful. Great advice. Thank you so much.
The ARKAST Podcast is brought to you by the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative. ARKAST is the Arkansas Podcast Festival, and it is going to be happening throughout September. That's right, September 1st through the 6th, we'll be hosting free workshops across Central Arkansas, and on September 7th, we will have the main event of ARKAST 2023 at the Innovation Hub once again. On September 20th, we're taking the festival on the road to Northwest Arkansas, where we will be hosting a podcast workshop at the Fayetteville Library, and the next day will be our very first annual ARKAST NWA. Tickets, reservations, and sponsorships are available at arkansaspodcasters.org.